Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Damian Brett. I'm editor of Air Cargo News. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second CEVA Talks, which are a series of live discussions with leading experts and practitioners from the logistics sector, where they can share insights and best practice about different aspects of the supply chain. I'll be moderating today's discussion, which is on collaboration and innovation, building the future of the air cargo logistics chain. And joining me today, I'm very pleased to say we have Brendan Sullivan, who is head of cargo at IATA, and Peter Penseel, who's Chief Operating Officer of Airfreight at CEVA. Over the next 45 minutes, we will examine the post-crisis agenda as air cargo seeks to solidify its contribution to the global economy, supply chains, and the airline industry. New trends are taking hold: the virtualization of human contact, the shift from transactional to relational, digitalization, e-commerce, a drive towards a sustainable future, to name a few. But how is air cargo adapting to these trends? What are some of the innovations and modernization needs shaping the future of air freight? And what is the role of international hubs as major nodes within the supply chain? These are some of the questions our panel will be looking at and trying to answer in today's discussion. There will also be an opportunity for you to ask some questions, and you can do that using the chat function, which I think should be on the right-hand side of your screen. So please don't hesitate to do so. It's your chance to pick the brains of Brendan and Peter. But without further ado, let's get the discussion underway. Peter, perhaps we could start with yourself, and just to set the scene a little bit. It'd be interesting to hear how you think the pandemic has changed air cargo, and because we're looking at the future of the industry, perhaps you could talk about some of the changes that you think are going to be longer term changes and not necessarily about the shorter term changes that we all know about.
Yep, thanks, and thanks for the introduction, Damian. And no, the pandemic, of course, and still has a huge impact, because a lot of the air cargo around the world is transported on passenger aircraft. I think roughly 55 to close to 60% was pre-pandemic uplifted with passenger aircrafts. With all those aircraft putting on the ground, a lot of pressure came into the air cargo market, and more freighter capacity was needed to serve. That's why you also saw a huge tendency that a lot of the freight forwarders were start to longer-term lease ACMI cargo aircrafts to supply to the demand of their customers, and still to deliver the service that the customers was expecting from all those freight forwarders. Of course, it was very difficult in the beginning, when I think more than 90% of the passenger network was grounded, and knowing with the percentages of uplifted by passenger aircraft, of which I just mentioned, that was a huge setback for the industry. And you see still today, when we think we are getting flights back, COVID incidents happened at ground handlers in China, but again is making airlines move towards stopping operating into China, mainly into Shanghai. That again a few weeks back gave a very negative element within our industry. Still, I believe that now with the passenger network coming back, it will also again have an impact on the cargo demands, because now all those passenger aircrafts who we are operating as on a freighter way, so only cargo uplifted on passenger aircrafts, those are flying origin destinations that are cargo needed. Now those aircrafts are coming back in their schedules of the airlines, and again, very good for the airlines, because the majority of the income is generated by flying passengers. And yes, there are, of course, a limited number of cargo operators only, but the majority are the combined carriers, where they are flying passengers around the world. And those aircrafts will now be deployed to the leisure markets. So again, you will see that in the upcoming weeks, when the passenger network are coming slightly back, those that are served are so for the market, and that will impact in the cargo capacity availability for the upcoming weeks or months to come.
And do you think that those kind of charter and freighter operations that forwarders have put in place, do you think that there'll be a bit more of that into the future because they're looking for a bit more dependability and kind of to mitigate risk in the future? Or do you think everyone will just switch back to the previous way of working, 50-50 belly freighter kind of situation?
No, I think that the major freight forwarders will continue their freighter schedules. They will trying to buy more capacity when available. The only thing is, of course, the risk for a long-term commitment. If the market comes back, then the major players with the extensive own network, so their own capacity, same as what we are doing with our Sky capacity, they are a little bit more fragile when it comes to the length of the contract, so the liability within the group. But nevertheless, I foresee that this will continue at least for a longer period of time. So otherwise, it will be difficult to predict what kind of capacity will be available to serve your current customers if you have a setup like what we and others have when it comes to own controlled capacity.
Okay, yeah. So kind of a bit of a slower change back to the way it was. And Brendan, obviously you'll be looking at things from a different perspective. Is there any kind of changes that you've seen as a result of the COVID pandemic that you think will remain in the market in the longer term?
There's probably a few that come pretty quickly to mind. So the first one would be e-commerce. We humanity embrace this concept of shopping online in a very a very speedy way. We all got locked down. We all had to stay home, and shopping online was a way we could get access to certain things which we wanted and or needed. And I think that's absolutely here to stay. We saw this huge progression in terms of how much e-commerce shopping is being done. It'll pull back perhaps a little bit, but I think it's here to stay. That trend. E-commerce does some really interesting things to the air cargo business in terms of forcing some digitalization and in terms of forcing some innovation because it's a very digital space from start to finish, and that's what the customer expects, and therefore it requires solutions that can actually do that. The other, maybe touch on a little bit what Peter was talking about. So I don't think it's just forwarders. I think what airlines did during the pandemic to secure some capacity for their customers, they very quickly shifted to these passenger freighters or passenger aircraft being used for cargo only operations. And that was really about offering some level of resilient capacity to their customers, right? And granted, it was pandemic mode, but it turned around very, very quickly. And a number of the airlines out there are looking to do that on a longer term basis. And I see that as a trend that's here. Is that the airlines are going to also want to be able to serve their forwarding customers with some secured capacity for them. And they'll look to not lose all of the capacity that they've been putting onto the market, in one foul swoop. So there's plenty that are looking at freighter operations. They're looking at taking perhaps some older aircraft out and using them for that. So I think that offer from both airlines as well as from forwarders is here to stay as well. There's quite a lot of demand, and right now, not enough capacity.
Yeah, interesting point, especially on e-commerce. Yeah, that's only going to change the way air cargo operates. Peter, also kind of looking more generally at air cargo innovation and the way air cargo is developing in the future. What do you see as the main priorities for air cargo supply chains of tomorrow? And and how will air cargo supply chains develop in the future? Do you think there'll be more nearshoring or a localization of production, or do you think that is just something temporary? Do you think people have more than one manufacturing base, to spread risk a bit? When it comes to supply chains, how do you think that those could change in the future?
Yeah, I think everybody is now aware that they have to have a plan B with the pandemic, and we saw it a few years back, and that was from a much smaller perspective. That was the ash cloud from Iceland, where also a lot of disruptions came into the air cargo industry, but that was mainly into the European airspace. But you will see that companies will look to alternatives if it's nearshoring, even if it's transforming from particular air and ocean into if those rates are still maintaining as what we see today, kind of a sea air mode or block trains or trucking, and especially on the trucking side and the block trains, of course, Asia into Europe. And there you will see that those alternatives will be looked very carefully, because it's too important not to look for opportunities else than air and ocean, and that will continue. On the data, when it comes to steering, I think that will have a huge impact, and I think it's also a must in our industry when you see nowadays that a lot of people are still reluctant to share data, and I believe that all the players within this supply chain, if they start to share data, we can also plan much better. But from all perspectives, from airlines to freight forwarders to shippers to handlers, and I think there is a huge step forward can be made with the digitalization in our industry.
I'm Brendan. You mentioned e-commerce a minute ago. How do you see e-commerce perhaps changing the way supply chains are managed in the future?
I think one of the biggest ways we'll see it is probably through the digitalization and almost obligation. Call it table stakes for being in the e-commerce business, is being a digital organization. And one of the reasons for that is the customer demands to know things which require data sharing amongst the parties. It requires end-to-end visibility. It doesn't mean that each party needs to have all of the information. They need exactly what is required to perform their duties. And so one of the things we did some lessons learned and trying to find out early on in the pandemic how to help and assist the airlines and their partners, succeed. And one of the first ones that came up was this need for constant communication. And of course, in a pandemic, that makes a lot of sense. But as you want to scale up and go global with that kind of approach, it can't be telephone calls. And, we are still a very people business, but you need to supplement that with data and be able to make decisions based on that. It'll offer much more resiliency in the end to do so. And really, there's no one party that has all of it, and that's true in e-commerce as well, right? There's no one person who holds all aspects. So it's very important then to connect and share this information end to end, to allow people to make better decisions, to allow for response planning when things aren't going quite right, and ultimately deliver on the promise that everyone's made to their customers.
Yeah. And Brendan, perhaps following on from that as well, obviously your kind of previous role in IATA, you had a background in air cargo facilities. Perhaps you could give us an insight into how facilities are developing to meet the needs of air cargo tomorrow's air cargo supply chains.
So there's probably a couple of aspects. There's the specialization in air cargo. So there's high specialty products that require a large amount of attention. So there's certainly that development. Temperature controlled facilities is one that's a very hot topic right now, as we're moving around quite a large amount of vaccines to support the global efforts. So there's all of those aspects that facilities need to be designed for and to be able to operate efficiently in order to accept these types of cargo. The other aspect would be also maybe a specialty, but e-commerce, right? Some facilities may go down the path of being, sort of parcel level, down at the piece distributing or assisting the distribution processes. Others, depending on the business model, it might be consolidation type approach. But either way, it's really affecting, either through automation or through robotics in some cases, but that need to be more efficient. And the last one I throw out there is really the sustainability aspect, the greener buildings, either through new builds or through fixing inefficiencies. Really, the air cargo industry needs to grow sustainably moving forwards. That's a big impact in the facility footprint. Not to exclude the overall aviation emissions side of things, which is also extremely important. But the on the ground work does have an impact in air cargo and aviation's emissions overall.
Yeah, and do you have kind of any kind of best practice examples of hubs that have been doing things really well, or different projects that hubs have implemented?
There's certainly a number of different facilities around the world that are looking at this. We don't normally point out which ones they are, but I'd say anyone that's investing in green facilities, that's looking to integrate their partners into that green approach, into the sustainable approach. Sustainability is not something that we do one party all by itself. So as an example, electrified trucks, they need to integrate into an air cargo facility somehow, maybe offering charging points, that kind of thing. That needs to be thought of and implemented together as a partnership. So hubs that are looking at it from that approach, bringing partners to the table to design the best solution, are the ones that are really going to excel and be where the cargo wants to be in the end.
Yeah. Peter, another kind of topic is the challenges that the market is facing in the future. What do you see as the key challenges that air cargo will be facing in the future?
It's what we just spoke about it. First of all, the financial situation of the airlines in general, and I think Brendan can only echo that. We don't want to see that airlines will disappear due to the fact of the bankruptcy, and that is, of course, a very important topic that we still keep all the players on board to make it happen, because a lot of people are behind those companies. A lot of families are touched by that. The people who were fired due to the fact of the financial situation with a lot of airlines, and not only airlines, it's the entire industry, the total chain is affected. So that's why I hope that the pandemic situation we can put it to a hold, controlled with whatever is possible, but that the people start to travel again, and those airlines can operate those aircraft for both passenger and cargo. Nevertheless, with the current situation, there will be maintaining for at least another year and a half, pressure on capacity in the market, because this is not solved that easily and not that quickly. So I still believe that years 22, 23 will be tough when it comes to the capacity and to make it happen. Nevertheless, we also are learning a lot from the last year, how we dealt with the pandemic and how to deal with buying capacity and deliver the service to our customers. So also that we have to take in full consideration, that how we operate today is already what we are doing for more than a year. So also this become sometimes the way to operate, and yeah, we have to deal with it. But that it will not be easy for the upcoming years, that's 100%. I think that will be the case.
Great, thank you, Peter. And Brendan, what are the kind of key challenges that IATA has identified and that it's kind of trying to prepare the industry for in the longer term future?
Well, I think even the longer term future starts with the short term pressure. And so we've got some challenging times ahead in the overall aviation space, as well as in air cargo. So that includes the capacity issue and how it plays out as passenger aircraft start to go back to passenger service, as well as the personnel issue. I think it's important that we kind of recognize just how much people have played an amazing role throughout this pandemic in all companies, in all countries. It's been very challenging for people, and they've really, largely across the board stepped up to the bat. But it's not easy to, in some countries get to work every day, to be able to then plan for that kind of, so those short-term pressures, I think, set us up for what we're going to need to do as we move forwards. That means we need better focus on people, right? Because people, manpower planning, and all the aspect of having engaged people in our workforces is a long-term journey. Capacity planning and communicating with our partners needs to be a long-term trend. It's something that's started, and we've been working that way for a while now, but throughout the pandemic. But we really need to make sure that that's not something we fall back into old habits, roll back to paper-based processes, because sometimes it's easier not to, not to keep the pressure on to move forwards with the digital effort. So really, and probably the last one that I want to add is the safety side of things, right? We can't, as a result of what we're doing, take the attention off of the safety and security aspects of air cargo. There's increased demand for lithium batteries. That remains a problem throughout the industry, and we really need to, as an industry, focus on it, collect and share data, so that we understand the risk and can integrate that data into risk assessments, but also call on the regulators to really do their job. The regulators need to step up to the plate, and where people are not doing things properly, that they take care of that and actually penalize those individuals.
And
very important topic is that, Damian, that everybody within the chain must be responsible when it comes to safety of human beings, and not a single dollar can justify that we make decisions as an industry to uplift unsafe materials via air freight. And that is a strong thing that we will echo within the industry, and that we keep telling everybody this cannot be tolerated, and that's why we need regulators and the people involved with production of those DGs to be fully aware what we are doing as an industry. But again, we cannot tolerate this kind of behavior.
Yeah, I guess from kind of both your perspective, the safety aspect when it comes to lithium batteries and making sure the product quality is up to scratch, that's something that's almost a bit out of your hands. So I guess it's almost from a kind of you guys have to take kind of campaigning angle from that one to try and help resolve that issue.
There's certainly the campaigning angle, the advocacy angle, that regulators need to step up and do their job. They have not done so up until now in all instances. They've not penalized people who are willfully non-compliant. There are other things that I think supply chain partners can do as well, in terms of sharing data, in terms of spreading the message, so that manufacturers who maybe are very willing to comply but unaware, become aware of the regulations, and also that we deploy solutions that allow for the risk mitigation to actually occur. So an example of that would be additional fire protection, so fire resisting containers to be used inside the aircraft, this sort of thing. We still require regulators to develop standards with us, and some of these practices, but it's something the industry can also do moving forwards. With those standards, we can actually implement these things into our safety risk assessments and allow us to operate and then grow more sustainably, ultimately.
Great. We've had a few questions come in from some people, so we'll go through a couple of those. I'm not sure if people want me to mention their name or not, so I'll just do the questions, and apologies if you did want me to. One, Peter, this is probably perhaps one for you on the container shipping crisis and the situation in container shipping at the moment. Although it's not an air freight topic, it's having a big impact on air cargo because just a small percentage of modal shift from air to sea can impact things. Is there any indication from CEVA's perspective about how long the container shipping crisis will last? Is that kind of starting to ease now? Are there any signals that it's going to ease?
No, I'm not really an expert. Yes, our mother company is in shipping, and my colleagues from the ocean side.
Mm-hmm.
I think still there is a shortage. A lot of ocean carriers are trying to order as much as they can new equipment, but I still believe that it will maintain in 22 as well, especially a main part of it will be shortage. And with the shortage and also with the shortage of capacity, what we see also is already sometimes a shift from ocean to air, even in an environment that air capacity is tough. But there we see more and more requests to do changes from ocean to air or to sea air to make it happen. But 100% to say it will take till next year, August, or even longer when it comes to the container shortage, I'm not 100% sure, but I foresee that it will take months ahead to get that sorted out.
Yeah, certainly seems from a bit like you, Peter. I don't follow it sea freight too closely, but it seems like a couple of the container shipping lines have aren't going to increase their prices any further. They've kind of said they're not going to increase spot, which sort of suggests that the plateau's been reached. So perhaps it's at least plateauing off. But time will tell, I guess.
And you see, of course, if you look into one particular point, Long Beach, California, where there are so many vessels in front of the port who cannot come in, if that will increase, then automatically shortage, but even further shortage on the vessel side will continue.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues in container shipping at the moment. We've also got a follow-up question on digitalization, which is, of course, going to come back to. So it's a good question. Sadly, digitalization means new systems which require training, and a lot of companies are not willing to pay for it. It's kind of a statement. There's a question in there as well. Obviously, digitalization is, it's not necessarily. It's quite an expensive thing to do. It can cost a lot of money to update your systems. Do you think there's kind of a danger of there becoming a kind of two-tier market where you've got the companies that can afford to invest in all these new systems and the ones that can't, and not just kind of companies, but also different areas of the world that could not be able to develop quite as fast?
From our perspective, the more modern approaches. So if taking as an example our one record standard for data sharing. So it's data sharing, using a defined set of terms, and then using an industry standard API. As a result of that, it's actually not as expensive as it used to be to build some of these bigger legacy systems or to buy them, as the case may be. The different companies that are getting engaged in that space mean that there's more opportunities for small and medium enterprises to engage in digitalization. I think the other thing that's really important to look at is we often looked at digitalization as removing one aspect, one piece of paper, one process point, and I think if the companies look at it more from how they can operate more efficiently for themselves, right? They likely find that each one of these digitalization efforts is a step in the direction of efficiency, and efficiency in the direction of sustainability as a result. So it's really making them more sustainable organizations. And so I don't see the gap widening in any way. I actually see it coming closer together. There are more service providers out there who can offer connectivity. There are more ways to engage using standards that allow you to just plug in with what you are using today to your partners. And really kind of speed up the effort. There will be people and organizations that maybe can't get there 100% right away, but I don't believe that this need is creating a huge wide gap or widening the gap that may already be there.
Is that kind of your perspective as well, Peter? Is that how CEVA is seeing things?
No, I think Brendan is spot on, and everybody is always saying, or a lot of people are saying, it will increase the cost, and we are not able, so we create kind of a Champions League versus a European League. But seeing the new developments and the infrastructure and IT, and of course, if you want to do more electronically, it will cost. And certain companies have the financials to do, others have less. But still, I believe, as what Brendan said, with the latest developments, everybody can make it happen to do more digitalized business with each other and also serve their customer. And at the end of the day, I think it will have huge benefits for the industry to do less paper. And again, we are talking, I'm too long in the industry that I already heard paperless this, e-cargo that. But we really now must make it happen for the future, because this is the future. So for us, it's exactly the same, investing in infrastructure to do business as what we just spoke about.
Peter, do you think the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of digital technology? It certainly seems to have sped up. I don't know whether that's just coincidence or, with people working from home, have they kind of been forced to switch to digital ways of working?
I think it will have a positive impact, especially on the paperless, what we just said. We are now doing meetings with Zoom, etc., or with Teams. But I think the industry was already on the way to make a lot of digital improvements and to make it happen. Will it be speed up? I think, yes, it will have a positive impact.
Brendan, this question is possibly for you. Obviously, a few years ago, everyone was talking about blockchain being used in the supply chain. Do you think blockchain's got a place? Is there any blockchain initiatives that IATA are working on? I vaguely remember something.
We've explored blockchain, and we continue to actually. I think the reality is blockchain became a very, very quick buzzword, right? We all wanted to look at deploy blockchain.
Yeah.
Our view is that blockchain for blockchain's sake is not helpful. So where there is an identified use case, then of course we would look at identifying which ways aviation might want to use that. I don't believe that's necessarily been found at this stage, the use case. There are other approaches that we've taken up until now that are working quite well. But we do still see this on, for example, on verifiable identities and this kind of thing, where there are still explorations as to how blockchain might support that. And certainly there are lots of individual, amongst the community approaches where blockchain makes a lot of sense, and they're doing that. But globally, from a standardization perspective, that kind of thing, not that we've identified, but it's not the kind of thing that you say, no, it's done. Forget about blockchain. It's one of these one of these things that we continually look at, okay, what might be the right solution for a problem that we have at hand. And if it ends up being blockchain or any other technology or methodology or approach, then we would look at how the aviation sector, air cargo sector can deploy that.
Yeah. Yes, it's good talking about blockchain. It feels like going back in time a couple of years, even though it's a really modern technology. It was a buzzword a few years ago. And we've got another question here on environmental impact of air cargo, which is good because, I wanted to come back to this as well. This question, I wanted to know if the industry is financially able to invest into green aircraft. Yes, that is reference to technologies like SAF and possibly even electronic aircraft, and how that could play into the industry's development in the long term. I don't know if you guys could talk a bit about the kind of sustainability from an environmental angle that air cargo's been making.
I think that the two main manufacturers, Airbus and Boeing, I think they are working day and night on trying to find much greener engines and with the engine suppliers to get as much reductions on the CO2 emission to be produced by the aircrafts. And then, of course, you just mentioned the SAF, but the SAF is getting the CO2 reduction when producing that kind of fuel, rather than being more CO2, having better throughput via the aircraft, because that's not the case. If you use SAF, the CO2 emission via the aircraft engines is exactly the same as with kerosene. But the differentiator is how it's produced and on the forehand. And I believe that this is a really important topic. The majority of the airlines and the freight forwarders having discussions how we can increase, how can the market produce sufficient, because it's still not produced in a sense and everywhere around the world, that the percentages of the SAF fuel in the aircraft can be increased, because that is still a problem. But I think the industry is financially healthy enough to drive that part of the agenda in the social responsibility, to go for more green uplift, and that air cargo will contribute their part of it.
And could you perhaps talk about some of the measures that CEVA is taking to look at its environmental impact in the future?
No, for what we are doing on CEVA, and that is on multiple parts, that is in our warehouses, start to put the collectors on top of the roofs to make sure that every facility can produce their own electricity, and on a go green initiatives, rather than using normal old-fashioned ways of producing power into the warehouses. On the air freight side, SAF is a strong, but also to see how can we reduce paperwork internally and with our customers. On the ocean side, it's the LPG vessels that are part of the division of our mother company, where they drive it. Will this be the best solution for the future? Probably not. But today, this is the best thing to do to get those vessels sailed on their LPG. And on the ground, it's when you do the final mile deliveries. We just spoke about the e-commerce, doing it with the electric vehicles rather than with diesel vehicles. And all those initiatives are part of a big plan. Our company is very much involved in that, because we believe that this is the future of mankind, and that we have to prevail.
Yeah, interesting to see CEVA's kind of approach across the supply chain, and kind of
correct,
just one element of it. And Brendan, from IATA's perspective, where do you see the kind of how do you see the environmental challenge for air cargo playing out, and what's IATA kind of doing to encourage its or help its members be more sustainable from an emissions perspective?
So we, together with our members, developed some aviation targets, some commitments to combating climate change. So as an example, cutting our CO2 emissions in half by 2050, and we continue to challenge those actually. So that's not kind of one and done. We need to, as an industry, do more. Sustainable aviation fuels is one of those where we're working with our members and our partners. We have a fuel forum where they meet and discuss as to how we can, help increase production so that sustainable aviation fuel can be used on a wider scale. Progress is slow, but it's moving in the right direction. In addition to that, of course, airlines are obviously looking at more efficient aircraft, right? Flying greener aircraft. I think the reality is for large wide-body freighters, we're looking at efficiency gains for now. So flying it better, more efficiency in the air, better efficiency on the ground for turnaround as well. We're looking at more efficient engines. And there are examples of people deploying other approaches, skins that you can apply to the aircraft. These are the incremental gains that we're going to make in the short term. While we look at the longer term technology, it takes quite a number of years before an aircraft can be certified for flight, and that's the reality of a regulated environment. It's a good thing, as well as it can take some time. So we're working on all of those fronts, as well as in the cargo space. Peter mentioned some of the areas that they're working on. From CEVA's perspective, our role would be to make sure that airlines can contribute to that, right? If there's an interface, and there is almost always an interface between forwarders and airlines at some point, then they need to be compatible. Strategies for air cargo sustainability need to be somehow aligned to each other. Otherwise, it doesn't contribute positively to the overall space. So we have a complete program around that as well, on all the different aspects, looking at all of our standards, how they could be more compatible with sustainability strategies globally.
Yeah, it's an important topic. We've kind of coming towards the end of our session, but Peter, perhaps I could ask you one last question. We're getting a lot of questions coming in about the session is supposed to be on the future of air cargo, and I guess if we're looking at the very short-term future, as in the next few months, there's a lot of questions coming in about the peak season and prices rising and challenges getting cargo out of Asia. What would you recommend to people, who are looking at the peak season now? What's the best way to make sure they can secure air cargo capacity?
Start talking with us pretty quickly and make sure that your production planning is discussed with us, because I foresee a very strong peak due to the fact that what we just said, passenger aircraft going back to the passenger airlines to fly people and to sell tickets. So I really believe that it all has to do with planning and joint responsibility to make it happen. Damien, that what we just said, that some of the passenger airlines will still keep some of their capacity, if not utilized 100% for passengers to fly the passenger freighters. And there, I think we see still some opportunities. But again, if you're planning your peak season, you have to make sure your production is accurate, your planning is accurate, and to make sure that you're talking to us to make it happen. Because, it will be a tough season.
Yeah, so just getting early and plan as early as possible by the sound of it.
Yes.
Great. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of the session. It's been an interesting chat. We've heard about the impact of e-commerce, the impact of digitalization, and how that's been developing and possibly even accelerated over the last couple of years. How freighter aircraft are going to become an increasingly important part of air cargo supply chains in in the future, certainly in the medium-term future, and sustainability and the impact that that's having on the market. And yeah, it's been interesting to hear all the different kind of initiatives that IATA and I think CEVA are doing to try and play their part in reducing emissions in the supply chain. So yeah, it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Brendan and Peter. It's been interesting to talk to you. And thank you, CEVA, for putting on the webinar, and thanks for the questions coming in from our listeners. Hope you all have a good evening, morning, day, wherever you are in the world. And that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.